so much for coming to what we hope is the last exhibit in this building. I know I've said that at least 3 times before, but this time I really mean it. Ginny, our president, is here, but she has asked me to welcome you and introduce the program this evening, and I wanted to share with you the reason why. Doc Richmond, who many of you know, who is kind of the lifeblood of the museum, and who has spent as a full-time job for 3 years now, getting grants and overseeing the improvements we're making and the move of the Woolly House, is in the hospital. And he has pneumonia, but I understand that he's doing a little bit better today. So our hearts are all with him, and he's here with us in spirit. Speaking of the Woolly House, I just wanted to give you a brief update. It's coming along beautifully. Electricity is being put in, which is what makes me really hopeful that next year may be the year that we're there for the exhibit. The bricks are laid, but it's not too late. For those of you who procrastinate like me, I was the last one to get my money in, but it's not too late. We can expand the little patio that we have around the flagpole. I invite you to go over and look at it. It's beautiful, and we have applications here for the bricks right around the corner. This year's exhibit is radio and television, the boxes that changed our lives. And I realized after we picked it and we started to get to work how humongous a topic that was. So we did a couple of things to narrow it down. We started with a little bit about pre-broadcast, and then we just went through the 60s and we stopped. Because we figured most of us, some present company accepted, are old enough to remember the 70s and 80s and 90s well enough. We didn't need to go there, right? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. But before I did, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the people who have been so instrumental this year in helping us get to this point. We had wonderful partners, the New Jersey Antique Radio Club, and they're headquartered in Camp Evans. Do you guys know where that is? I don't know if you've been there, but they have a museum called Info Age. It's wonderful. It's opened every Sunday. We have literature about their museum at our table, and I encourage you to go. They were absolutely generous and selfless in their support. So many of these radios, the telegraph machine, the vacuum tube, which I understand is precious and rare, so many of the things, they brought them up. They worked with me for weeks, and as I did my research, I would take it to them, because, hey, I'm an English major, what do I know about radios and televisions, right? So they proofread everything and made sure that the story that I'm telling you is, in fact, true and accurate. Also, we were very fortunate to just kind of coincidentally, through our mayor, run into a gentleman named Chuck Theodoro, and he had in his possession an actual satellite and a life-size model of the Telstar satellite, which was the first communications and television satellite. And he wanted to share it with Ocean Township. He's an Ocean Township resident. And, I mean, go figure. This was the year I could use it, right? Any other year I couldn't have used it. So that's perfect. So there are wonderful photo ops up there. If you'd like to have your picture taken with Telstar, bring your camera. If you don't have your camera, come back tomorrow and have your picture taken. And tonight we have the children, again, from the intermediate school are with us, from the Forensic Club. Trudy Wolf-Lark has retired, so she's passed the baton to Susan Malta. So we have a fresh crew of children with a new director, and we can't wait to hear that. I just want to set the stage for them a bit, because they are going to reenact some of the classics from radio and television for us, and you probably are wondering which ones they are, and you're probably guessing correct. But before I invite them up, I just want to kind of walk through the tables for you, just 5 minutes, so you get a sense of the environment in which these little dramatizations took place. Over here, we start with before broadcast. This is stuff that I learned. I thought like Marconi invented radio, like, you know, Bob and Ray. No. Marconi invented wireless transmission of electromagnetic waves, right? Pretty fancy for an English major, right? But what that meant was really wireless telegraph, right? So before the 1920s, all radio was really point to point, and it was this. And it was of most interest to the telephone company, because the telephone company was interested in being able to connect to Western Union, obviously, it was very interested in being able to connect where its wires stopped, right? And it couldn't build physical wire, very interested in sending that signal through the air. Ships were extremely interested because obviously you can't string a wire to the ship. And there was a huge boom to safety to be able to get signals from ship to shore and from ship to ship. And in fact, the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 was a huge boom to radio and wireless and resulted in a tremendous investment in research and in the infrastructure needed to build the wireless stations, because there was a wireless radio receiver and transmitter aboard the Titanic. And the story is that David Sarnoff was in a building working for GE, don't quote me on that. He was working for somebody who was there to receive the signal, the SOS signal from the Titanic. And because another ship at sea heard the signal, came, and 750 people were saved. And of course, that was a huge story. And the radio part of it was a big part of the story. So that was kind of the big start. The next thing that happened to really affect was World War I, because in World War I, FDR was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, very interested in being able to communicate to his ships, right? And all of the patents that were held to put together radio were held by individuals. The early inventors were individuals more than corporations, and they held competing patents. So it was a real barricade to moving the industry forward. FDR said, no problem, here's the money, and I exempt you from all intellectual property restrictions, and opened the door to the formation of the radio industry. And then we sent thousands of men, in that day, off to war to use the technology, and they came back excited and ready, poised for the launch of the broadcast industry, which started in the 20s. The very first commercial radio station was in Pittsburgh, KDKA. The very first commercial broadcast was of the results of the presidential election for Harding. In those early days, the earliest radio stations were owned by the companies that made radio equipment. They didn't even have commercials. I mean, the things we just take for granted, like commercials paid for TV, they didn't figure that out in the beginning. So Westinghouse had a station. This was a Westinghouse station. They had no money for talent, so the trumpet is here to illustrate that Westinghouse played music. The radio broadcast station was right in their factory. They just got guys off the factory floor. They brought their instruments. They went into the broadcast studio, and they played music that went out over the airways. There was a lot of evangelism, because ministers would talk for free, and there were astrologers, because astrologers would talk for free. So the program was pretty rinky-dink. As it started to become more entertainment-oriented, of course, they didn't know what radio really was, right? So what they did was take vaudeville and put it on the radio. So a lot of the early radio personalities were vaudeville stars, and the early radio dramas, like they didn't figure out, they thought, well, people can't see. So when they put on a play, there would be a narrator who would say, here's the living room, there's a red couch on the right, there's a door over here, she's, you know what I mean? They didn't realize the power of the imagination, that we could figure that out ourselves, you know what I mean? We could make the couch any color we wanted, and that was really a wonderful thing. So it was very awkward and stumbling in the beginning. Oh, this is a really fun thing. Remember I told you that early radio was point to point, right? So it was about one person getting a signal to another person. So early radios, you listen to them through headsets, right? So once they began to broadcast music and comedy, the whole family wanted to listen, but you got this headset thing. So one of the things they would do would be put the headset in a crystal bowl, because the crystal bowl would resonate the sound. Then the family would sit around the dining room table and listen to the crystal bowl. Somebody was clever enough to figure out, well, maybe this would make that a little easier, right? So this is an Atwater Cantu, a wonderful early example of the kind of radios. It was really tough to tune things in. You know, all of these knobs were to search and search and search so you could find a frequency. So the radio owner would keep a log of the frequencies that worked, because it was just so difficult to find a frequency. As you move into the 30s, then this begins the golden age of radio. course, what else was going on in the 30s? The Great Depression, right? So you would think, wow, well, that's a strange time to launch a new technology, but really, social workers reported that people were willing to give up things like clothing and in order to get the radio, because the radio was free. Once you bought the radio, the entertainment was free, and things were dismal, and you could use a few laughs, you know what I mean? So it was really great. And they started to think about, how can we afford to get big name talent, people like Jack Benny and Rudy Vallee and Al Jolson? So in order to do that, Can't, a wonderful early example of the kind of radios, it was really tough to tune things in. You know, all of these knobs were to search and search and search so you could find a frequency. So the radio owner would keep a log of the frequencies that worked, because it was just so difficult to find a frequency. As you move into the 30s, then this begins the golden age of radio. Of course, what else was going on in the 30s? The Great Depression, right? So you would think, wow, well, that's a strange time to launch a new technology, but really, social workers reported that people were willing to give up things like clothing and in order to get the radio, because the radio was free. Once you bought the radio, the entertainment was free, and things were dismal, and you could use a few laughs, you know what I mean? So it was really great. And they started to think about, how can we afford to get big name talent, people like Jack Benny and Rudy Vallee and Al Jolson? So in order to do that, remember now you've got a broadcast tower, it's broadcasting to where it can reach. That little local radio station can't afford to pay Jack Benny. So they decided, we're going to string the radio stations together. And then I can broadcast from one, but Jack Benny will go out over my network, right? And they actually used the telephone company to connect the radio towers. So the broadcast towers were connected by telephone lines in order to create this critical mass of listeners. And they invented the commercial. We're all glad, right? They invented the commercial so they could afford to pay the big name talent. And you start to move into people like Fred Allen and Amos and Andy, who understood the medium and knew what to do with it and really turned it into an art form. Here we see some of the classic radio types, the two types of table radios, the Tombstone and the Cathedral. This is the classic one that you saw in your invitation with the family sitting around. I mean, this is so much fun, right? The family sitting around watching the radio. But that was what was going on here. As you get into the 40s, the golden age of radio continues. And again, war has a significant impact on how we use radio. Because remember I told you that the early programming was really vaudeville gone audio, right? Very amateurish, but then it was a lot of comedy and slapstick and that broad-based stuff we think of with vaudeville. When we entered World War II, people were starving for news of what was going on. So there was a very perceptible and significant shift in what was filling the hours of radio broadcast. And the number of news shows really grew. And that's when Edward R. Murrow made his career. And it's interesting as well, because in the beginning, the radio stations just went to the linotype machine and took what the newspapers were using for news, pulled it off, and went and read it over the air. Well, the newspapers started to figure out that the advertisers who used to advertise in their newspapers were now advertising on the radio, and they were giving the radio their news. So they stopped doing that, which forced the radio stations and networks to start their own news agencies. And Edward R. Murrow is probably the symbolic epitome of news, period. Just the integrity with which he reported from London just before the war and during World War II. And then, of course, if you remember, Edward R. Murrow was the one who called Joe McCarthy in the early 50s when he was destroying lives, searching for communists. And it was Murrow who said enough of this and took him on. But that's jumping ahead a bit. So that's the 40s, and again, you'll see that the war just had and there's just this exponential growth in the number of radios. 40s is also interesting because if you think back to the invention of the printing press, which was when, 1500? 1400? 100 years ago. from the 1400s until broadcast radio in 1920, people got their information from print material, right? The radio really shifted that. The radio became a primary mechanism by which people interacted with the world. And all of those farm people who had been cut off from civilization now had access to what was going on with an immediacy. They became ear witnesses to history, right? Come into the late 40s, you've got now a new upstart technology that's going to unseat radio, and that's television. So in the late 40s, the first TVs were manufactured for commercial consumption, retail consumption, in the late 40s. And guess what happens when they start to put programming on the radio, on the TV? They take the program. Radio took programming from vaudeville. Where do you suppose TV took the programming? From the radio. So you get Jack Benny going from radio to television. You get Meet the Press went from radio to television. Guiding Light, the longest running broadcast show in history, went from radio to television. And more than I can remember off the top of my head, but it's all here for you. But it's the same thing. And again, they didn't understand their medium, right? So in the beginning, it was just people sitting around talking to it. They didn't realize special effects, visualization, all that stuff that came later. So by the time you get to the 50s, radio is really unseated as the primary American source of information and recreation and entertainment. And really, the country just falls in love with television, and the number of televisions goes from, like, I think, not even 1 million at the end of the 40s to over half of the households having them by the middle of the 50s, and then, just exponentially. Till I think in 1960, 9 out of every 10 households had a television. And now every household has 10 televisions. So most of us are old enough, young enough, old enough to remember the 50s firsthand. And so I'm hoping some of this will be interesting to you. Oh, just an aside. FM radio was actually invented before the war. And it was invented because AM radio is not high quality, very staticky, very subject to environmental interference. And the earliest band that was assigned to FM radio is shown on this radio. After the war, David Sarnoff had spent a lot of money on this new medium, television, and he also had a lot of money invested in AM radio stations. So he convinced the FCC to change the frequency allotted to FM and made all the FM radios in the world obsolete and set back the industry for about 20 years. 15 years, right? So there's just so many interesting sub-stories to this whole thing. So enjoy the 50s. There's stuff here about all of those perfect American families that made us all neurotic because we thought that's what our life should be like, right? So the apron and the pearls, are June Cleaver, Father Knows Best kind of stuff, right? Paola, the quiz show, Scandals, I Love Lucy, misery television, remember Queen for a Day? Where these poor pathetic women were on stage telling, just pouring their hearts out about how miserable their lives are. And the most miserable of the miserable was the Queen for the Day. So it's kind of reality television. You've got to start. Get it better. And of course, television was a huge threat to the movies, right? And it's interesting because every time there's a new technology, the old technology sees it as a threat, and they try to stop it. Like you could stop radio, like the newspapers could have stopped radio, or the radio could have stopped television, or the movies. You know what I mean? There's a lesson there that maybe somebody will learn. So in response, the movies started doing go to the movies, smell-o-vision, you know what I mean? And 3D. And panoramic, what do they call that? Panavision? But you know what I'm talking about, those big epic movies, the 10 Commandments, and all that stuff, because they said, hey, we can do that, and that little screen can't do that, and they thought that would bring people into the theaters. And then we go into the 60s, and in the 60s, you really see television coming of age, because with the Telstar, the satellite that we actually have up there, all of a sudden, in your living room, in real time, you could see everything that was going on in the world. right? So we could see the assassination of, we could see the funeral of our president and the assassination of his assassin on live television, right? We could see the Vietnam War on live television. We could see the civil rights movement and the beating of the civil rights marchers in the South on television. And seeing it was like experiencing it, and it changed public policy, right? If we hadn't witnessed the Vietnam War, I would suggest that the emotion with which we reacted to it would not have been as strong. So you really see television as a medium now for shaping public policy and social policy. In the 60s, you see, the invention of the transistor changed all of electronics. It made it portable, right? So all of a sudden, we have a young generation who has disposable income, and they have the means to have radio and television and all of these things privately. No more the family sitting around a big box in the living room, because things became affordable and portable and personal. And then we have all of the hits that we remember of the 60s, the start of Sesame Street, which revolutionized children's television. We have the televised Nixon-Kennedy debates. We have, it's just so rich. And then up here, upstairs, what we do is we try to make the connection of all of this to us here in Ocean Township and in New Jersey. Because if Silicon Valley is the heart of the internet boom, New Jersey was the heart of the radio and television boom. And it was where the first FM radio station was. We had, it's just so rich. And then up here, upstairs, what we do is we try to make the connection of all of this to us here in Ocean Township and in New Jersey. Because if Silicon Valley is the heart of the internet boom, New Jersey was the heart of the radio and television boom. And it was where the first FM radio station was launched. It was where the first television was manufactured. It was where Dale Tessite did all of the research in wireless transmission. It's where David Sarnoff started RCA. There's just one thing after another that's for us to be proud of. Ford Evans, Marconi actually started he sailed in Sandy Hook to do his first demonstration in this country of his wireless, and then he built his factory, his American branch of his factory, at what is now Camp Evans. So I mean, we are extremely rich in the history of radio and television. So that's it. That's that. Now you remember all that, right? So when these kids come out, you got all this in your head, right? So now I'd like to introduce Sue Malta.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sue Malta, and I am the Forensics Advisor at the Intermediate School. And I want to thank the Ocean Township Historic Association for inviting us to perform. We're looking for any opportunity we can to ham it up. Tonight we've chosen 2 selections from the forensics repertoire that we hope will entertain you. They may even bring back some happy memories and a chuckle or two. For these students, it was a history lesson. They researched a little bit about these new programs, and we even watched some of them on YouTube. Thank you for providing us with the opportunity for a history lesson wrapped in entertainment. Without further ado, let me introduce you to some members of our forensics team. You may be aware that tonight is the Fall Festival at the Intermediate School, so we only have some of our members with us. All right, we have Vina Ganesan, Nick Marchetti, Jacob Pirogovsky, Abby Wilson, Shanina Pinchinat, Isha Ramanujam, and Megan Hamilton. Okay, and we are ready to
Abbott and Costello were one of the greatest comedy teams ever in history of show business. They mastered the straight man-clown relationship, creating a magical chemistry that would take them from the burlesque stage to radio, to Broadway, to film, and finally to television. William Alexander Abbott was born right down the street in Asbury Park, New Jersey. His future partner, Louis Francis Cristillo, was born in Paterson, New Jersey. Their official teaming began in 1936 when they appeared on the Kate Kate Smith Radio Hour, performing their soon-to-be-known as signature skit, Who's On First? In 1956, Abbott and Costello were brought together on the Steve Allen Show before a nationwide viewing audience. Steve Allen announced the induction of Abbott and Costello and their gold record, Who's On First, in the world-famous Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Many are not aware that Abbott and Costello are the first non-baseball playing celebrities ever to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Their clean style of comedy, born on the burlesque stage over 80 years ago, continues to find a ready audience in today's marketplace. We hope you enjoy our tribute to the kings of comedy with Who's On First by Nick Marchetti and Jacob Pergoski.
Well, Costello, I'm going to New York with you. Bucky Harris, the Yankees manager, gave me a job for coach as long as you're on the team.
Look, Abbott, if you're the coach, you must know all the players.
I certainly do.
Well, you know, I've never met the guys, so you have to tell me their names, and then I'll know who's playing on the team.
Well, it seems to me they give these baseball players very peculiar names nowadays.
You mean funny names?
Yeah, strange names, pet names. Dizzy Dean,
His brother Daffy?
Daffy Dean,
They're French cousins?
French.
Buffet.
Oh, Gouffé Dean. Well, let's see. We have in the bags. Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
Well, that's exactly what I want to find out.
I say, who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
You the manager?
Yes.
You gonna be the coach too?
Yep.
And you don't know the fellas' names.
Well, I should.
Well, then who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the fella's name.
Who?
The guy on first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Go ahead and tell me.
That's it.
That's who?
Yes.
Look, you got a first baseman.
Certainly.
Who's playing first?
That's right.
When you pay off the first baseman every month, who gets the money?
Every dollar of it.
All I'm trying to find out is the fella's name on first base.
Who?
The guy that gets the money.
That's it.
Who gets the money?
He does. Every dollar of it. Sometimes his wife comes down to collect it.
Whose wife?
Yes. What's wrong with that?
All I want to know is when you sign up for first baseman, how does he sign his name?
Who?
The guy.
Who?
How does he sign it?
That's how he signs it.
Who?
Yes.
All I'm trying to find out is what's the guy's name on first base?
No, what is on second
I'm
base?
not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
One base at a time.
Well, don't change the players around.
I'm not changing nobody.
Take it easy, buddy.
I'm only asking you, who's the guy on first base?
That's right.
Okay.
All right.
What's the guy's name on first base?
No, what is on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know.
He's on third. We're not talking about that.
Now, how did I get all the way to third base?
Why you mentioned his name?
If I mentioned the third baseman's name, who did I say is playing third?
No, who's playing first?
What's on base?
What's on second?
I don't know.
He's on third.
There I go, back on third again. Would you just stay on third base and don't go off it?
All right, what do you want to know?
Now, who is playing third base?
Why do you insist on putting who on third base?
What am I putting on third?
No, what is on second?
You don't want who on second?
No, who's on first?
I don't know, third base. Look, you got an outfield?
Sure.
The left fielder's name.
Why?
I just thought I'd ask you.
Well, I just wanted to tell you.
And tell me, who's playing left field?
Who's playing first?
I'm not. Stay out of the infield, will you? I want to know who's the guy in. What's the guy's name in left field?
No, what is on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know.
Third base.
The left fielder's name.
Why?
Because.
Oh, he's center field.
Look, you got a pitcher on this team?
Sure.
The pitcher's name.
Tomorrow.
You don't want to tell me today?
I'm telling you now.
Then go ahead.
Tomorrow.
What time?
What time what?
What time tomorrow are you going to tell me who's pitching?
Now listen. Who
I'll
is
break
not
your arm if you
pitching?
say who's on first.
What's
I
on
don't know. What's the pitcher's name?
What's on second?
I don't know. Third base. Now, you got a catcher?
Certainly.
The catcher's name.
Today.
Today. And tomorrow's pitching.
Now you've got it.
Now I've got it. All I've got is a couple of days on the team.
Yep.
You know, I'm a catcher too.
So they tell me.
I get behind the plate to do some fancy catching. Tomorrow's pitching on my team and a heavy hitter gets up. Now, the heavy hitter bunts the ball. And when he bunts the ball, me being a good catcher, I'm going to throw the guy out at first base. So I pick up the ball and throw it to who?
Now that's the first thing you've said right.
I don't even know what I'm talking about.
That's all you have to do.
Throw the ball to first base.
Yes,
Now who's got it?
naturally. Who? Naturally.
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 So I pick up the ball and throw it to Naturally. Naturally gets the ball.
No, you don't. You throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
That's
That's what I said.
You're not
I throw the
saying
ball
it.
to Naturally.
You throw it to who?
Naturally.
That's it.
That's what I said.
You ask me.
I throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
Now you ask
You
me.
throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
That's it.
Same as you. Same as you. Now I throw the ball to who? Whoever it is drops the ball and the guy runs to second. Who picks up the ball and throws it to what? What throws it to? I don't know. I don't know. Throws it back to tomorrow. Triple play. Another guy runs up and it's a long fly ball to because. Why? I don't know. He's on third and I don't give a darn.
What?
I said I don't give a darn.
Oh, that's our shortstop.
Television is an important part of our everyday lives. Did you know that once there wasn't television, it was hard for people to find out the weather and learn how to cook? Well, in the 1920s, while everybody was gathered round the family radio listening to The Shadow and Edward R. Murrow, Herbert Ives was giving a dramatic demonstration of a new communication medium in Whippany, New Jersey, just about an hour or so from here. In the 1940s, the first color TV was broadcasted in Camden, New Jersey, at the RCA plant there. Now, please, take a walk with us down memory lane as we recall the history of television, condensed, with us, the TOIS Forensics team.
Some said it would never replace radio.
Some called it the idiot box.
Some use it as an excuse to avoid conversation at the dinner table.
But whatever form it's taken, it's grabbed hold of our collective conscience like a dying man falling off a mountain, clinging to a side of a canyon, so hard it's making his fingernails bleed.
Shadow and Edward R. Murrow, Herbert Ives was giving a dramatic demonstration of a new communication medium in Whippany, New Jersey, just about an hour or so from here. In the 1940s, the first color TV was broadcasted in Camden, New Jersey, at the RCA plant there. Now, please, take a walk with us down memory lane as we recall the history of television, condensed, with us, the TOIS Forensics team.
Some said it would never replace radio.
Some called it the idiot box.
Some use it as an excuse to avoid conversation at the dinner table.
But whatever form it's taken, it's grabbed hold of our collective conscience like a dying man falling off a mountain, clinging to a side of a canyon, so hard it's making his fingernails bleed.
That's right. Tonight we will take you down down through history of television. Hurry up, everybody! It's almost time.
And that's all for Uncle Milton. Tune in next week for more of Milton Berle's comic adventures.
I love this part.
2 hours later. 3 hours later.
Now, Jimmy, that's enough TV for today.
Ah, gee, Mom.
Eventually, things smoothed out and modern programming began. And with shows like I Love Lucy, the modern sitcom was born. Lucy, what did you do? I washed Little Ricky's clothes! What's so bad about that? He was still in there! Lucy, you are so funny. And now, we'll do a brief history of famous sitcom one-liners. Hey, up, boy! One of these days, Norton, one of these days. I know nothing. What you talking about, Willis?
Farm!
And now the rage is reality shows. First, it was MTV's The Real World. Then, Survivor. We'd like to show you the future of reality TV. A bold and daring new glimpse into the human soul as demonstrated by the cutthroat world of amateur bowling. It's called Between the Lanes. Good shot, buddy. Thanks. What if reality TV has gone so far that without knowing we're all being watched right now? Who's to say we're not on some sort of cosmic version of Survivor where our destinies are being controlled by an unseen television deity? Here, eat your spoon! Thank you, and good night.
Aw, man, it's over!
Thank you very much for inviting us to be here.
Thank you, kids. You were wonderful. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hard act to live up to, but you did. Okay. Thank you all for coming, and please enjoy the food, enjoy the exhibit, and tell your friends and neighbors to come. You know, we work for months and months, and it lasts for 10 hours, so we like to thank
Go at the back door.